Hey guys, it's Charlene. Today I'm going to be sharing a fun card with you that's not your traditional shaker. We're going to make a shaker using vellum. This is a really fun technique and it's so easy to do. So I'm going to start out here with the Million Little Things stamps from Picket Fence Studios, and there's some coordinating dies there. I'm stamping the whole image out in some alcohol marker friendly ink because I'm going to color this with my Copic markers. I will list down below in the description all of the colors that I used to color the image, as well as all of the products that I'm using today. So I finished coloring and cut it out, and now I get to move on to the fun background creating the shaker element. So I've got the Hexagon Randomness stencil here and some cherry Simon Says stamp ink, and I'm coming in and I'm pouncing in here just to add a little bit of interest to the background, so that way when the shaker mix is sitting all at the bottom of the shaker, you're still going to have a little bit of color back behind your image. So this is a really easy way to do that. Any stencil that you have with a pattern like this, it could be dots, it could be triangles, it could be hexagons like this. If it has that repeating pattern, it is a very nice way to break up a background, one, and two, it's a really nice way when you're doing shakers like this to have color on there, even when your card is standing up on display. Another thing you could do rather than using a stencil like I did is you can actually glue a few of the sequins from whatever sequin mix you're using. You can glue them to the background so that way they stay there when the card is standing up. So once I finish with the stencil, I'm coming back in just with what's left on my pouncer. And again, you also could do this with a blending brush. Anything you see me doing with pouncers, you can do with blending brushes. I just find that the pouncers are really handy and I am enjoying them a lot. So I'm coming in all the way around, just making sure I get this faded out really nicely. So that way, once we put the vellum over the top, you'll get just this little halo of color peeking through on the sides of the cards. So I've got a half sheet of vellum there, and I've put double-sided tape all the way around on the back of my stenciled panel. And now I'm going to put one side of the vellum down and I'm going to bend it over on top of that double-sided tape. Now I like to do this from the middle kind of out. I find that that helps keep it a little bit more straight and makes it so that it bends over on the cardstock a little bit easier. So you'll see I'm sort of bending the vellum down, getting the crease, and making sure it's nice before I really push it down onto the double-sided tape. Now I'm turning it over, just making sure I like how it looks, and then I can come back in on the other side and do the exact same thing. So you could cut your vellum down smaller than this, but I personally like to have more than I need, so that way I can just trim it off. I find that it's always better to have a little too much than not enough and not able to get it around your card. Now you do want to make sure it's not too tight because you still want to be able to pour in whatever sequin mix you are using and make sure that your sequin mix has room to move around in there. So once I have the two long sides done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and trim off the excess vellum. I do want to make sure those creases though are really nice. So I'm coming in with my bone folder here and just making sure to push them down really well. So that way doing the folding on the bottom and top is actually easier. So you see I folded it up. I haven't moved the release tape yet. And now I'm going to go ahead and trim off that excess vellum like I mentioned. Now I'm not using any kind of expensive vellum here. I'm using an inexpensive vellum from the craft store that I picked up. It's a huge pack. It'll probably last me the next 10 years. So this does not have to be your super fancy vellum. That's the thicker weight that you can use for heat embossing. This can just be a really simple, inexpensive vellum. So I trimmed it down so that there's about 3/4 of an inch. And now I'm coming in and I'm going to trim each corner at an angle, but I'm not going to cut it all the way from the corner of the card. I'm going to go up just a little bit from the corner of the card for where I start that angled cut. And that's because I don't want a opening at the corner of the card to show once the card is all folded up. That's especially important if you're going to be using really small shaker pieces, because you don't want there to be anywhere that those pieces can fall out. Now I'm going to remove the release tape on the bottom, and I'll go ahead and secure down that flap. I'm not going to do anything yet though with the top flap, because I want to go ahead and add my shaker mix and decide how much I want in there before I close the whole thing up. Here I'm using the Cosmo Sequin mix. It's this really pretty reddish purple sequin mix that has what's called shaker garnish, which is those little kind of tube-shaped pieces, and then it also has sequins in it. So it creates like a fun mix of things shaking around in your shaker card. And so you can see here I've closed the flap over and I'm shaking around just to make sure I've got the amount I really want in there. And sometimes I'll go back and forth quite a bit and I'll pour a lot out and put more and pour some more out. You can see here I just take a little bit of that out, but then I'm pretty happy with the amount. I generally like for there to be enough that it's fun to shake, but so that there's only kind of a little bit of a line of mix along the bottom when the card is standing up. So hopefully that makes sense, but you can see how I'm going to be putting this card together. Now I'm taking off that extra piece of release tape there. I'm going to go ahead and seal up that whole card front. And once that's done, I can go ahead and adhere the whole thing down to a card base. You could use liquid adhesive to do this. I don't really recommend it. I recommend using double-sided tape just because you have so much going on these kind of full front shakers that it can be hard to adhere them to the card base just with liquid adhesive. So use a very strong double-sided tape is my recommendation. I'm using the double-sided adhesive from scrapbook.com. That stuff does not quit, you guys. It's super sticky. So make sure you get your piece where you want it before you push down, because it's not coming back up once you've done that. So you see I've removed the rest of the release tape there, and now I can make sure that's really nice and secure. I am going to go ahead and glue my floral piece to the front of the vellum. It does take a little bit longer because you have to give it some time to dry. But I find when you're working with a really detailed floral piece like this where you have lots of edges, the glue works better to hold all of those pieces down. Whereas if you were using double-sided tape on something like this, you would really have to add a lot of small little pieces of tape to hold down all of those leaves. What I like to do is go ahead and position my element wherever I like it, and then I just put an acrylic block on top and I let that sit for a while to let the glue dry. Now you'll notice that some of the leaves are going off over the sides there. I just come along once everything is dry and use my scissors and trim those off. You do want to be careful because you don't want to cut the vellum, because then you'll create a nice big hole in your card. And don't ask me how I know that. Just be careful and trim along the vellum, but don't cut the vellum. And once you get those leaves trimmed off, hang on to them, because the excess leaves that you trim off on cards, those make really great accent pieces for the inside of your card. So you'll see once I have these all trimmed down at the end, when I show you the finished card, when I open the card, I have glued all of those pieces on the inside, so it just kind of creates a cohesive look from the outside to the inside of your card. I do that with lots of different things. I always save any little things that I've cut off or little extra pieces, maybe if I'm using pattern paper or something like that, and I try to incorporate some of them on the inside of the card. Now, I'm not always successful at remembering to do that, but it is such a nice touch and a very quick and easy thing to do when I remember to do it. So I've got my sentiment here. It's a small sentiment, just says thank you. It is also from that same stamp set. When you're working with large images, generally small sentiments work really well, and the same vice versa. When you're working with a very large sentiment, smaller images tend to work well. Now, that rule can certainly be broken, but I tend to stick with that most of the time. I did put a couple extra layers of cardstock on the back of that sentiment, so I cut out, I think, 2 extra of the die cut. So here's the finished card. Look how beautiful it looks on the inside. I hope you guys try this technique. I hope you picked up some tips and tricks today. Please be sure to like and subscribe, as well as hit that notification bell so that I can continue bringing you more crafty content in the future. Until next time, happy crafting.